All right, let's turn to Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11. And prayerfully, we'll get through half of it tonight. We'll get through half of it tonight and finish it next week. We'll see. Daniel chapter 11 is going to be a lot of history for us, but to Daniel it was not. So again, what we're going to see is the precision by which Daniel received the prophecy and how it was fulfilled. Because this is the neat part about Daniel, and this is really helpful when you do any apologetic work. You know, somebody will say, how do you believe that Bible? Well, I believe the Bible because of prophecy. That's one of the main things. Because Daniel, and keeping the date of Daniel where it should be, Daniel was given prophecies, and we, way after Daniel, and have seen these prophecies fulfilled. So there's more to be fulfilled, and I want to make this clear. Up until today, there's been a lot of prophecies fulfilled. The probability of that happening as the Bible is written is slim to none, but there have been a lot that have been fulfilled. But there's twice as many more left to be fulfilled. So I look at it like this: that the Bible's been perfectly accurate till now. When we study prophecies that are going to happen, it's going to be perfectly accurate. But here's the best thing about prophecy. When you look back, you can say that's what this said. But when you're looking ahead, you're not sure of how it's all going to work out. So we're going to get a picture tonight of how it was told to Daniel and how history unfolded. So if you don't like history, we're in trouble. Well, you're in trouble with most Bible studies anyway, because you are studying a historical record. Somebody once told me, I really am not a fan of history. I don't know why you do so much history. I go, I don't know if I could teach the Bible without history. You know, so, but I'm a fan of history because it's showing me how God has worked everything out. So let's pray, and we'll go to Daniel chapter 11. Father, it's a wonderful privilege again to come before you, to lift each other up in prayer, to remember those that can't be here because of some sickness or illness, and some are traveling. Father, be with them as they travel. But tonight, as we go through Daniel, we want to get a good picture of what you were told to Daniel, these prophecies, and how Daniel probably just understood to the ability he could. And now we look back and say, man, what a wonderful picture God has drawn for us, that we will see more to come. And Father, as we look at these incidents that's happened in history, help us to understand the historical record that collides with a biblical record. And Father, again, we thank you for this time. In Jesus' name, amen. Another thing I'm going to say before we get into this, there's a whole lot of history that's gone on in the world. I don't know if you've all realized that. I don't know how many of you went through different classes in high school or college that was history specific, like, you know, American history or World War I or Peloponnesian Wars or whatever. There's a lot of wars and things that went on in history, and the Bible only selects the ones that apply to what's needed in the biblical record and ignores other things in history. And that to me has always been fascinating, because God says, yeah, all this stuff is going on, and God knew all that stuff was going on, but it's irrelevant to the story that God wants us to understand his plan for his son to come the first and second time. So all these other things that are going on. So if you ever look for America in your Bible, you won't find it. And I don't care how people try and make it fit. There's been a lot of things going on in the last couple of years, and I just want to let you know ahead of time. There's things that are going on. Are they biblical? Are they, you know, because we've looked in the Bible and we've seen famines and pestilence and all these things going on, and we see now what's going on in the world because of COVID or in spite of COVID or whatever. I don't get too involved with this as a judgment from God. I want to let you all know something. This is like firsthand knowledge because I read the Bible. We live in a fallen world, and I expect bad things. I expect evil people to do evil things. I expect good people not to do good things all the time. And things are going to happen because of this. Ready for this? Sin is problematic. And since we live in a fallen world, and I had a nice discussion with somebody the other day, well, the pastors. How would you like to live 969 years? You ever think that through? Methuselah lived 969 years, and I'm already crying and complaining about my age. Add another 900 years to that, and I'm going to be miserable. But I mean, if you think about it, as you go through the biblical record, we see there's things that are attributed to sin and what sin has caused in this world. And if you think this world is getting better, better revisit that theological model, because there are people that think we're ready to the kingdom to be ushered in because things are getting better. And I'm going, what are you looking at? So when I say these things, understand there's things in the biblical record that point to causation, but we can't say judgment. We can't say whatever we're talking about, but we can look at prophecy and say this will happen, and this will add up to God's final judgment, because that's where we're heading in biblical history. And let me say another thing about biblical history. We always look back and say that's historical. Right? History is usually past. Don't we usually look at history as a past event? To God, history is future and a definite certainty. So God has looked at everything the way he can see things and said, I'm going to give you the givens of a future. He doesn't tell you what stock to buy, but he will tell you that this is going to happen and it's a given. And when I look at these things, especially in Daniel, I see a God that has planned everything and never going to be surprised by anything. And I think that's really cool, because we're going to a book that he's given us and said, I'm only going to give you 66 books. That's all you need. You don't need some guy to say, hey, I had an epiphany or I had a revelation, and you can't find it here. Because guess what? Most people haven't studied this fully. I've been teaching the Bible for almost 30 years now, and I have not got through every book of the Bible. I was looking through the other day, all the Bible books I've taught since I've been teaching, okay? And a couple of them, you do double because people want to hear what Genesis is about or something like that. And I'm going, man, there's so much here that I haven't got to yet. So when we do Daniel, I want you to understand the historical value, past, present, and future, but I only want you to see the biblical record. What's here, I think it's important us to focus. This is why God wanted us to know this thing. And you say, well, why do I have to know this? Because it just didn't pan out. God was involved in the flow of things that occurred. And what does it say? Go to Daniel chapter 2. Let's do this. By the way, if anybody's thinking on YouTube, why is Eric dressed like this? It's a Awana sports shirt night, and since baseball season is 2 weeks away from me, I figured I was wearing this shirt a week. I got to say this because I know you're going to Daniel 2. I know where I'm going. Somebody looked at me and says, oh, you like New England Patriots? It said baseball. The last I checked, the Patriots play football. People are just fascinating. Read the whole thing. Yes, I do like the Patriots. Where was I going? Daniel chapter 2, verse 24. Verse 20. Let's start in Daniel 2:20. Daniel answered and said, let the name of God be blessed forever and ever, because, I think most of your versions may say for, but because his wisdom and power belong to him, and it is he who changes the times and the epochs. He removes kings and establishes kings. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to men of understanding. And we can go on, but what I wanted to focus on here is when we look at these things in the historical record of Daniel 11, it's God that's really in charge of everything. And we can ask, why did you allow so-and-so to be king or president or prime minister or dictator or whatever? It's because God's got a plan where he's moving all of history to his final event. So he's allowing certain things to do, which is fascinating because you go into verses in the New Testament right now, Satan's the prince of the power of the air. God's given him realm here. He's allowed to do certain things, but not everything, and only certain things. So you got to kind of put all these in the equation as we look at these things, because when we look at some of these leaders, you say, how did God even allow that person to rule? And the chaos that we're going to look at in the very first 30 verses of chapter 11, you go, that's craziness. Where's God? Well, He's there driving it and at the same time allowing it, because guess what? We're going back to the same thing. The consequences of man's sin allows God to say, this is what you wanted. Now, I'm not going to say you get what you vote for. Hey, you prayed for that. But there are certain things God's allowed countries to have and set up because that's the way the people are going. And Romans says, men are without excuse. There's no excuse. And I like that because people say things like Flip Wilson. You guys remember, anybody remember Flip Wilson? The devil made me do it. No, he didn't. You did it. You chose these steps that led to where you're at. Don't blame it on other things. Don't be like a 15-year-old. So God uses in Daniel chapter 11, what's happening here, really verse 1, let me do it this way. I want to say verse 1 attaches to verse 10, which it does. But we really got to sometimes not read with chapter breaks and verse breaks because it's still all one section. But I found this very interesting because chapter 11, verse 1 says, in the first year of Darius the Mede, I arose. We got to find the antecedent for I. It's Michael in chapter 10. Michael arose to be an encouragement and a protection for him, Daniel, and for Darius specifically. Now, here's what's going on. If I do my math correctly, even though we're in chapter 11, we just went 3 years before chapter 10. So it's kind of like, what just happened? Okay, so all these things, it's not a flow of things, a flow of events. It's the events that Daniel is allowing us to look into for the specific purpose of what's going on, okay? So I want you to know that. So what we really have is in chapter 11, verse 2 on, is a flashback up to something that happened that led up to chapter 10. And in chapter 10, there's this, Daniel's praying, remember? And he's met by these different theophanies and angelic beings and told to basically that they were delayed in coming for an answer. And what was the answer? So Daniel's saying, here's what happened, and I'm going to tell you what set it up, what was going on, okay? So we're going to look at what transpires in Persian history. And the first thing I thought about is, do I really want to talk about Iran tonight? But it's fascinating because if you look where Persia started, and we're going to do that in a few minutes, they started on a good foot when Darius became king. I mean, they really were. And I think I said this when I did that lesson too. When a Persian makes a rule or decree, it's irrevocable. There's no time in history you can do something like we've done in our states. We could set a law and then make another law to cover that law and another law to cover that law, so that the first law gets lost in. But there's a lot of laws to get them off. This is a warning to everybody. To get a law off the books is almost impossible. So when you vote for something, remember, if you're putting it in a law, it's kind of hard to get it. Think about it. Our tax base. Oh, we're just going to add a percentage to your tax and try getting that off. Oh, in a good year, we'll take it back. Prices rise. It's very hard to get them to go back down. Those kind of things. So when we look at laws, specifically the Persian laws, it's hard to get them erased. Okay, so you got to write another law. Esther's a really good picture of that. Persian law. Esther's, they want to kill all the Jews. Haman's excited. Right? He's going to kill all the Jews. Well, they ended up finding that Haman's not. So they can't have killed all the Jews, but they instead of saying we're going to stop the law, which they can't do, they make another law to say, okay, Jews, you got 30 days or something like that to go kill everybody else. So you got to jump start to protect yourself. You get what I'm saying? So we can look at these things and know that. So let me give you a quick outline where we're going. We're really not going to spend a whole lot of time, but I want you to see the flow of history in chapter 11 before we read anything. In chapter 11, 2 through 35, it's the time period from Daniel. I don't know how else to write this. From Daniel's life on earth to us. It really come and past us. So, but it's really to us. And what I mean by us is to this time frame. So if we do this lesson again in 20 years, it could probably still be to us. Okay? But they're all fulfilled in detail by our time. So there's nothing left from Daniel 2, 11:2 to 35 to be fulfilled. It's done. But Daniel's doing this. Daniel's looking this way at it coming, and we're looking back at Daniel. It's done. Kind of get the understanding? So Daniel had no idea. So in Daniel verse 2, we have 4 Persian kings, which is fascinating, because if you go to Persian history, you wouldn't find just 4 Persian kings. You'd find a lot more. And that's what I mean. These only matter to the biblical history. And we'll talk about those 4. In verses 3 and 4, we talk about Greece, all the way to a guy named Alexander the Great. Then in verses 5 through 20, we talk about Syria and Egypt, and it'll say north and south. It's real easy to know north and south. Find Israel, north is up, south is down. That's it. So when it says north and south, just do that on the map, because it's all it's talking about, saying here's Jerusalem, let's go with that, because that's the, what's it called, the epicenter, and then look up and down. So north would be Syria, south would be Egypt. And we'll talk about who those 2 represent. I don't want to, and some of this we've done. This is kind of like a review, capsulation, and then a little bit more expounding on what we've already done. Verses 21 through 35 is one of the kings of the north, the Seleucid kings of Syria, is crazy. He's absolutely nuts. He is, you try and find equivalents for madmen or mad leaders throughout all of human history, and they're not equivalents. They're all different and just as crazy in their time. As we would say, oh, does he compare to like Hitler? Well, they're different, but they're the same. They're still evil. And this leader will be a comparison to the Antichrist. And he dies in about 165 BC, and we'll talk about him. Verses 36 through 12:3, verse 11:36 through 12:3, see how the chapters kind of overlap? Is the time of the end. We're going to talk about the end. Verse 36 through to 39 is going to be the final king. We have different names for this final king: the beast, the willful king. He's going to be attacked by ready for this? The king of the south and the king of the north. Where does it put battleground? Right in the middle of Israel, right? And we've all seen, where was it? Didn't Luther have a picture of Armageddon up there? There's a guy that has an app that's a pretty good Bible teacher, and he lives with his back door looking out of Armageddon, which is kind of interesting, because I feel like texting him, when you see something happening, let me know. You'll be first up. But if you've ever been there, and I got to just say this, you'll hear jets flying all the time out of there. You don't know where they come from. It's the weirdest thing in the world. Because when I was there looking over to the valley, I'm going, I hear a jet. They're having this little Bible class over here, and I'm wandering over and going, where's the jet come? Where's it? Whoosh. I go, what did that just come? I believe, I can't prove it, but I've been told this too, but they have some kind of underground bunker in Armageddon that they come out from under the ground and boom, now you got to understand something. That is the most defense country in the world, and these guys are flying low. And I'm just going, this is so cool. So I sat there and watched. I didn't know what they teach people. So you don't want to go with me on an excursion. I just wander. Well, I said, what are you doing? I go, you don't hear the jets? He goes, what jets? Are you serious? Anyway, but you think about this. In order for this beast, this final king to rule, where's he going to be ruling from if he's getting attacked from the north and from the south? He's going to be reigning in Israel. But that doesn't make him an Israeli leader. So we'll have to see that picture, how it works out. Verses 40 through 45, you have the end of the Antichrist, the final royal pavilion, and last stand. That's what you have there in that part of the chapter 11 and verses 12. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 3 is the deliverance of Daniel's people. I put down resurrection and rewards. We'll kind of talk about that a little bit when we get there. It's not going to be this week. Oh, by the way, I just thought about something. We're not meeting next week. Y'all have a nice preparation day, I guess it's called, right? To get sick and stuffed the next day. I always try and figure out who gets more stuffed, turkey or me. So anyway, but And it's interesting because Daniel gets some final instructions what to do with these prophecies that we would kind of feel that they're odd. And I think what we have to understand is what's happening with Daniel and who's given him these prophecies to really get a full grasp of that. So we'll get that at the end of chapter 12. So let's go to the Bible and look at chapter 11. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read the verses and I'm going to do a short historical comment on it. I don't want to bore the socks off you, so if you want to start a head tick, you can take the socks off now and be comfortable. I'm trying to be accommodating. And I'll tell you something. I find this so fascinating because you go to history books, and history books never mention what? Daniel. They never mention the Bible. But yet the Bible mentions only the chosen few for this story, and I find it, which is, okay, you learn this history. That's really good for history. If kids are out there learning history, bring in the Bible to your history classes. That'll blow your teacher's head off, right? And kind of, what's this kid doing? He's got the Bible involved in here. But this is from Daniel's time to specifically through the Grecian period is some of the craziest things that ever went on in the history of the world. I will say that. Even from Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian period, we can add that in too. But when we look at this, it says in the first year, verse 1, of Darius the Mede, I arose and to be an encouragement and a protection for him. Now remember, what the angels do is protect anybody, specifically Israel, gives them encouragement, takes care of Israel, protects Israel. But if you're protecting Israel, you've got God on your side. Because I read that in Genesis 12, which is the Abrahamic covenant. Those that bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel are asking for a load of trouble. Okay? And this is where that works out a lot. And we'll go briefly in a few minutes to look at something. Well, let's just do it now. Go to Daniel chapter 6, because I want to show you what's in the backdrop of this. Daniel chapter 6. And what we have, again, is what is Darius the Mede doing? Is he blessed or cursed? That's how you weigh countries. It's really cool if you did that. You say, okay, let's pick a country out, country B, and say, what are they doing with Israel? How do they treat Israel? Are they going to be blessed or cursed? And you can just, real easy, put the chart up, blessed nations and cursed nations, and you'll see which chart is longer, okay? But this is fascinating because Darius in Daniel chapter 6, remember the narrative that happened there. Daniel in the lion's den, right? Daniel's fed lion food, and lion look at him and say, nope, not eating him. And when Darius sees this, he sees the greatness of Daniel's God. And he says this in verse 25. Remember, a decree is irrevocable. Persia is no longer an empire, but they are a nation. Okay? Then Darius the king wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language who were living in the land, may your peace abound. So Darius is making a letter, a decree, to the people that are there. Everybody. Now remember, Persia took over the Babylonian Empire. This is an amalgamation of a lot of people groups. Okay? It's not like saying, hey, we're united front, one language, one people. No, this is a bunch of different people groups. And this is what he says, I make a decree that in all the dominion of my kingdom, men are to fear and tremble before the God of Daniel. Now, forcing someone to serve God is not a good thing. But he's honoring God because this is what he says. For he is the living God and enduring forever, and his kingdom is one which will not be destroyed. What kingdom is that? Do you realize Darius is a pretty mill guy? He's expecting a God to come and set up a kingdom. It would be foreign to his mind, a kingdom in someone's heart. Think about this for a minute. He's king of a kingdom. He's ruler. Where's his kingdom? Almost over the entire planet. Okay? And he's saying his kingdom is one which shall not be destroyed. So he's saying it's more than human, because human kingdoms, he knows kingdoms are destroyed. He just destroyed one. He took down Babylon. And he's got to know enough about history that says Babylon wasn't the only kingdom that went down. Assyria went down before that. You with me? I think this is so fascinating because he says some things, and his dominion will be forever. That means his kingdom can't be destroyed. When he sets it up, there'll be no end to it. Darius knows something factual. He has an end. God has no end. So he knows something about God. God is what? Eternal. Fascinating. He's got pretty good theology, don't you think? Then he goes on, he says, he delivers and rescues and performs signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. Who has also delivered Daniel from the power of the lions. Now just think about this. If you were, I don't think anybody's done this, but it'd be kind of a neat. Spend some time dissecting the decree and tell me what you think of Darius's theology. And you say, hey, that's pretty good, better than most people's, right? But this is not a theology class he's holding, it's a decree he made. And the decree he made is already in biblical record that God is going to come and set up his kingdom, and his dominion will be forever and ever, and he will rule. And Darius is just saying, it's going to happen. So even though he put it in writing, now the reason I said that because he's done that, he's blessed Israel because he's talking about an earthly kingdom. He's got to be talking about the nation of Israel. How has he treated the Jews? Magnanimously. He has done, outside of the biblical record, there's enough to show us how he's treated the Jewish people. Okay? How's Persia doing so far? I think it's pretty good. They started off on a great foot. I think it's here, biblically, they're good. And what's happening is he's getting angelic protection in Daniel chapter 11, verse 1. Verse 2, go to 11:2. And the only reason I brought it up is because Esther helps us. Persian kings made decrees like crazy, and they're all irrevocable, but I don't know if any of them today know what was said before. You know, so it's kind of an interesting thing. So in Daniel chapter 11, verse 2, it says, now I will tell you the truth. Behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia. Then a fourth will gain far more riches than all of them. As soon as he becomes strong, though, through his riches, he will arouse the whole empire against the realm of Greece. Now, Daniel's standing, talking to this angelic being. The Persian Empire just rose to power. Daniel's seen the Babylonian Empire basically extinguished. He's seen, it hasn't happened yet because this is 3 years before, but he will see that exiles will start returning under the prompting of Cyrus to allow them to return back to Israel. Okay, and he says 3 more kings are going to rise, and a fourth. So he talks about 4 more, Darius, and 4 more. But if you ever gone and done some searching on Persian kings, it's like nailing Jello to the wall. You really can't figure out who's who and who's where and who came first. And you try and find a distinct succession of kings. It's not always great. I'm going to get the 4 we're going to talk about in this. I'll address. But the years and the Dariuses that are involved, because Darius, I believe, is a title too, not a name specifically. They kind of overlap, so it's hit or miss. But he will talk about Cyrus the First, who was the one that reigns over Darius the Mede. Okay, you don't have to write this down; just kind of get a picture. So then he'll talk about Cyrus the Second, who is also known as Cambyses, and that's another thing. He's not even in the Bible. There's no biblical record of him, but he is a king that he's talking about. Then there's Darius the First, Hispates. He rules in the last part of the 5th century into the 4th century. And then there's Xerxes, who's Artaxerxes, who is Ahasuerus. Every time I see that name in Esther, Ahasuerus, I think of a dinosaur. Dinosaur is there. Ahasuerus is the same as Xerxes and Artaxerxes. The problem is, again, nailing down the names and who they are, and there's always been an argument, who's the Persian king in Esther? Just different names. Pardon me? Probably just Xerxes. I'm not sure second. It may be second. You see, this is again, we're getting into these issues. And I believe there's probably 3 or 4 study Bibles. I don't know if they'll all agree. It just depends on who you get that says what. So, yeah, I'm pretty sure. That's Awares, yeah. So, it's hard. But he does have these, because here's what happens. The fourth one, who is Artaxerxes, or Xerxes, the Esther one, okay? He will be the richest of all. We know this because his empire goes against the Grecian Empire. Okay, and when he ruled, this is not in Esther, which is kind of fascinating. His army had 2.5 million men in it. Just think about that, 2.5 million men. But when he invaded Greece, he lost. Really, really bad battle. He lost. It's called the Battle of Thermopylae. Probably seen it in movies at some point, right? The movie 300, yeah, that's the animation kind of thing, animated, whatever they did to that movie. But he was assassinated in 465, and that probably brings the culmination with the Persians. So you can look at the Persians. They started in about 539 BC to 465 BC, and that's it. You think about it, empires didn't last that long. That's, America's been a country a long time. God blessed us because we're in the blessed column. We were. I don't know if we kind of starting to move over a little bit, but we still are. We're just a blessed country. It is. People don't realize how blessed this country is. All the problems we bring up and say, stop that. You don't realize how blessed you are. Go move. You don't like it here? Move. Move. I've been in different countries. There's places you just don't want to go. I'm sure there's probably places you can hide from the guerrillas in Nicaragua or something. Go ahead. There's plenty of land there. It's not going to be fun living there. Then in verses 3 and 4 it says, "And a mighty king will arise, and he will rule with a great authority and do as he pleases. But as soon as he is arisen, his kingdom will be broken up and parceled out toward 4 points of the compass, though not to his own descendants, nor according to his authority which he wielded, for his sovereignty will be uprooted and given to others beside him." That's kind of fascinating. So God says this to Daniel way before this happens. And when we talk about Greece, the Grecian king that arises and does as he pleases, we're talking about Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great does anything he pleases, and he does it with super speed as he conquers people. You know the one place that drove him nuts? Anybody know the one place that drove Alexander nuts to conquer was Tyre. It was built way out there in the water. And he says, you know what I got to do? I got to destroy all these towns, tear them apart, and I'm going to build a road because I'm going to go get them. And he destroyed all these people, and threw it in the ocean. In 7 months, he went and conquered Tyre. Because he had and I don't know what was at Tyre that was so important. What was their economics that they had? It's just like, I want that island to myself. But what I'm saying is Alexander was crazy. He ruled the known world at that time from Greece all the way to India. And he did it in a short period of time, 4 years. And 7 months of that was just dealing with one place to go get. And we discussed him a little bit when we did chapter 7 and chapter 8. But as soon as he rose this kingdom up to this huge place, it was torn apart. Alexander dies in 323, and his kingdom is divided between 4 of his generals, not any of his kids. Yet before his death, he made preparations that provided for the Lord's coming. Listen to what Alexander the Great did. He developed a universal language for Greece. You know what it's called? Koine Greek, that we have the New Testament that's written in. So when we talk about our Greek scriptures, and the genius behind it, the language is fantastic, but Alexander developed it. He united places with roads and routes because he plowed through everywhere and he needed a road to get places. So he built roads to get there. You know why all roads lead to Rome? Because Alexander started the infrastructure plan. He didn't need $1 trillion to do it. He just took it from everybody. That wouldn't be a bad plan. However, within this was Greek culture. And Greek culture and its thought process, its logic, along with its philosophy, helped develop a lot of things that was necessary when Christ came. It gave the forum for the discussions and the way Christ did a lot of his teaching, and his followers did their teachings. And that was the format for that, was because of what Greek philosophy, Greek culture brought in. There's a lot of Greek culture that survives to this day. Rome loved it so much, you know this about Rome. Rome, when they conquered the known world, they took on all the Grecian gods. They thought that was really good. Greek liked it, we like it, we just changed some of their names because it's Greek to me. I want to make it Roman to me, so we'll change their names. So that's kind of what happened when the Romans took over. He left no heirs. There was no one to succeed him. Now, here's the interesting thing. We always focus on 4 generals, but he had more than 4 generals. But the 4 generals are the ones that matter. The other ones were further out that had divided. Remember, it went from Greece all the way to India. And we're going to talk about 4 key ones. One was Seleucus. Seleucus became the father of the Seleucids. The Seleucids were basically Syria and the Mesopotamian Valley. Mesopotamian Valley means the place between 2 rivers. Okay, so Euphrates and Tigris Valley was his, so he took over Syria. Nobody wants it today, and the Mesopotamian Valley. That would be the north. Okay, when we're talking about north. Okay, and Ptolemy took over Egypt and probably the surrounding countries, which is the south. So we have the Ptolemies and the Seleucids. That's the main ones. They also, Cassander took over Macedonia and Greece, which is that was kind of the peaceful area for a while until more wars arise. It's fascinating when we talk about this time period between 300 to the birth of Christ, at least. There was tons of wars going on. Everybody was killing everybody. The Romans came, and guess what they wanted? They had the little, beauty queen saying, all we want is peace in the world, and Rome was finding a way to make peace in the world, and it was working out with a strong arm, but it was still peace. They're the ones that brought in Pax Romana, right? And if anybody did an uprising, they stopped it right away. There wasn't going to be a riot on my watch. We're done, kind of thing. So we have Cassander that went west, and east was Lysimachus, who took Asia Minor, which is kind of northeast, kind of thing. So, and there was other generals involved, but those are the 4 that mattered, because he said here it will be divided into 4 points of the compass, and that's east, west, north, and south. You kind of get that? And in verses 5 through 35, only 2 of these divisions will be addressed. So from now on, we're going to just talk about the Syrians, the northern kingdom, the Seleucids, and the Ptolemies, the Egypt. It's fascinating. Even in my lifetime, those 2 areas have been very tumultuous, haven't they? Egypt, remember the wars with Israel with Egypt, and Syria and Damascus, and the bombing that goes on there constantly. And both those areas didn't want people to call themselves Palestinians. They both rejected those people from living there. They say it's an Israeli problem. What? It's your problem. You don't want them. Nobody wants. Anyway. But so here's what you can do. Verses 5 through 20 is talking about the north and south. And then there's verse 21 through 35 is only going to talk about one that came from the north. So let's just do it this way. We're going to talk about different time periods. That's going to look really weird. He just disappeared off YouTube channel. I'm back. Probably the worst thing to have. So verse 5 says, So we're going to do 5 different time periods. We're going to talk about 5 different time periods. 5 and 6, verses 5 and 6 is the first time period. Okay? So verse 5 says, then the king, and this would help you if you'd had 2 color pencils. You know, color king of the south with one, king of the north with another. That helps you kind of figure this out, because this is going to move a lot. It says, so we're just going to deal with 5 and 6. Then the king of the south will grow strong, along with one of his princes, who will gain ascendancy over him and obtain dominion. His dominion will be a great dominion indeed. And after some years, there will form an alliance, and the daughter of the king of the south will come to the king of the north to carry out a peaceful arrangement. But she will not retain her position of power, nor will he remain with his power, but she will be given up, along with those who brought her in, and the one who sired her, as well as the one who supported her in those times. That's a lot. And what's fascinating is how this prophecy got carried out to the nth degree. Here's what happens. The king of the south of the Ptolemies grew strong. This is Ptolemy the First, who joined forces with the Seleucids until they became his enemies. So Seleucus of Syria, Seleucus of Syria, overtook the Ptolemies and had great dominion. So right now the north is the champion, okay? Their alliance was due to the daughter of the Ptolemies, who married into the Seleucids. This daughter's name was Bernice, or Berenice, I guess you would say. Bernice would be without the E, so it's Berenice, okay? She married King Antiochus, Theos of Syria, okay? So it's the daughter, so this works out well so far. It's matching, okay? The word Antiochus, just so you know what it means, it's a Greek title. It's not the guy's name. It's not probably in his birth certificate. It's probably, Willie or something. Antiochus means the one who is opposed to possessing something. So it's kind of like, I'm not going to possess anything. I'm just going to run everything. This king divorced his wife in order to marry Bernice. So he's going to marry her because he wants this alliance, okay? But when he took his first wife back, his first wife married Berenice and her son. Listen, there is nothing crazier than men and the looseness of immoralities to do this. So he marries this girl for an alliance, took the daughter, married her. But then he says, you know something, I've had some time with her, and she said, but I really want to go back to my first wife. Brings her back in the picture, and that's danger, right? So she kills these 2 off. So what happens to the alliance if they're dead? Severs the alliance. Got what's going on? Okay? So that's what happens in 323 after Alexander's death until about 246 BC. Again, time is in a jello mold, okay? But isn't that pretty much match up to what happened here in the biblical record? That's why a lot of people, you will hear a lot of critics saying Daniel was written about 2 BC. Because all these things would happen, and Daniel would just say, oh, see, this happened, so let me write something about the daughter. The problem with that is, you can't do that for all of Daniel, because most of Daniel's prophecies in this chapter go all the way to the end. And Daniel's still not around writing anything. You can't have your cake and eat it too. Kind of get what I'm saying? So if people say, well, it's a later date, well, fine, but what do you do with these other prophecies? Time period number 2. Time period number 2, verses 7 through 9. And it's hard to keep with all this motion. All I want you to see is the precision. If you get anything out of tonight's class, get the historical precision of prophecies fulfilled. We have that with the birth of Christ, right? How many prophecies just in that couple of chapters in Matthew and Luke? Prophecies are nailed to precision, okay? Verse 7, but one of the descendants of her line will arise in his place and will come against their army and enter the fortress of the king of the north, and he will deal with them and display great strength. And also their gods with their metal images and their precious vessels of silver and gold will take into captivity to Egypt, and I missed the word. And he, on his part, will refrain from attacking the king of the north for some years. Then the latter will enter the realm of the king of the south, but will return to his own land. So you got a lot of things going. Did you notice something though? Who's in the middle of this trek? Who's getting warned, the path worn, well worn in the Middle East there? Isn't it Israel? Israel's the only road from Egypt to Syria. You know that, right? And it's well worn. And I wish Israel would learn to set up toll roads. It would have stopped these problems. I'm collecting a tax in and out, whichever way you're going. But here's what happened. So in verse 7, Berenice, his brother, rose to power. He's Ptolemy III. It's real easy. He wanted to avenge his sister, so he invades Syria, kills Antiochus' wife, the one who killed his sister, and returned back to Egypt with 40,000 talents of silver. He took and according to verse 8, he took 2,500 images of the gods that were there. So he came light, left heavy. Okay? Verse 9, according to what verse 9 says, so Lucius II of Syria, we're back north, then attempts a revenge attack on Egypt, but was forced to return without success. Back and forth through Israel, okay? He was killed when he fell off his horse. Did he? Kind of like, God, you know. I don't know where he fell off his horse, so don't anybody walk up afterwards. Did he fall off his horse in Israel? That would have been due justice. I don't know. Time period number three, verses 10 through 19. 10 through 19. This is about 223 to about 187 BC. This is getting really interesting, and I can't go through, after 187, all the different historical movements that's happening, because what you also have in the background is the rise of the synagogue and the Jewish system that we know as the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the sects of Judaism, kind of. So these are all kind of, because it's not part of this story we're dealing with now, but that's all happening too, to mold everything that when Christ comes, and it says he came in the fullness of time. All these things are moving towards that date. Kind of get what I'm saying? Verse 10. And his sons will mobilize and assemble a multitude of great forces, and one of them will keep on coming and overflow and pass through, that he may again wage war up to the very fortress. And the king of the south will be enraged and go forth and fight with the king of the north. Then the latter will raise a great multitude, but that multitude will be given into the hand of the former. So what happens here, other than we could say war after war after war after war, I don't know if you realize war and the footprints that are going through Israel. First of all, what we have in verses 10 and 11 is Antiochus III, or Antiochus known as the Great, will war with Egypt, but first gains control of the Middle East. Later is defeated in the southern border of the Middle East by Ptolemy IV. He lost 70,000 soldiers in the battle in the desert. Antiochus later returns to wage war with Ptolemy of Egypt with the aid of the Jews. Now we'll see that because I kind of read a little bit ahead, but let's read verses 12, 13. When the multitude is carried away, his heart will be lifted up, and he will cause tens of thousands to fall, yet he will not prevail. For the king of the north will again raise a greater multitude than the former, and after an interval of some years, he will press on with great army and much equipment. Now in those times, many will rise up against the king of the south, the violent ones among your people, violent ones among your people, talking to Daniel, that's the Jews, will also lift themselves up in order to fulfill the vision, but they will fall down. Now here's the interesting thing. How long do you take it when people are trekking through your neighborhood before you say, I'm going to stop them? The problem with Israel, they didn't have enough people and enough forces to stop anybody, so they got trampled on. That's what's basically happening here. And the interesting thing is, if you're Israel, listen, we've talked about 300 years of wars already. If you're Israel, which side do you take? You know, I mean, really, because both of them don't care about you. So who are you going to side with? Because once you side with whoever it is, now you have a bigger enemy than you had before, because they were just traipsing through you. Now you got an enemy, which is fascinating. Because when Israel gets into the picture, they become the enemy of whoever even they side with. So now they got double issues going on. Verse 15 says, then the king of the north will come, cast up a siege mound, and capture a well-fortified city, and the forces of the south will not stand their ground, not even their choicest troops, for there will be no strength to make a stand. But he who comes against him will do as he pleases, and no one will be able to withstand him. He will also stay for a time in the beautiful land. So this is someone who's going to stay and hang out in Israel. And will do what? With destruction in his hand. Now, all I could think about, many of you aren't going to get this, but to me it's a really great analogy. The very first video game, anybody remember this one? Pong? To this day, I played that. Boom, boom, boom. And all I can think of is Pong is a picture of Israel and the north and the south. Boom, 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 boom. And that thing would just, I could still see it. The black and white screen and the little square ball, right? Going back and forth. And that's what's going on here. And what we have now is a picture of what's going to happen with Israel, because verse 17 says, and he will set his face to come with power in his whole kingdom, bringing with him a proposal of peace, which he will put into effect. He will also give him the daughter of women to ruin it, but he will not take a stand for him or be on his side. So here's what's happening. Antiochus the Great now gives his daughter Cleopatra, not the first one. There's a lot of Cleopatras. Everybody thinks, oh, that Cleopatra. This Cleopatra to be wife of Ptolemy. So Cleopatra's taken to Egypt in 192 BC in the hope that his daughter would deliver Egypt into his control. He's doing it because he's saying, if my daughter's there, she'll work things out and she'll make sure daddy gets the kingdom, which I could never understand, because if Syria gets the kingdom of Egypt, you realize what they now obtain. The whole Middle East, okay? But Cleopatra became loyally in love with her Egyptian husband, and it didn't work out for daddy. So Antiochus wanted more, so he conquered many islands of the Aegean until he was defeated by the Romans. He returns in disgrace to his own land and was killed while plundering the temple of its treasures. Okay? Temple in Israel. Gone, goodbye to rubbish, but there's more to come. So we have a few minutes. I'll give you the fourth time period. I don't know if I think we'll kind of stop at the fifth time period because it involves where I really want to go in next week. So we'll do this last period, which is verse 20. So we'll read verses 18, 19, 20. And then he will turn his face to the coastlands, which he did. He went to the islands. Remember, he went to the Aegeans and capture many. But a commander will put a stop to his scorn against him. Moreover, he will repay him for his scorn. So he will turn his face toward the fortress of his own land, but he will stumble and fall and be found no more. Goodbye. Verse 20 says, then in his place one will arise who will send an oppressor through the jewel of his kingdom, yet within a few days he will be shattered, though neither in anger nor in battle. So the son of Antiochus the Great, who is Seleucus the Fourth. If you can keep up with these names, let me know. I'm looking at notes. Who's Seleucus the Fourth, who inherited two things. Here's what he inherited. Inheritance is good. So he had one good, one bad. He inherited daddy's kingdom. It's cool. I am the king. He also inherited daddy's debt. And when you got to pay off daddy's debt to Rome, remember what I said? Rome wanted peace at all costs. And Rome is also known for what? Render unto Caesar, that is Caesar's. They will tax you heavily. Do you know something? If you owe something to the IRS, where they charge you percentage? You know the percentage rate they charge you? It's not like 1.9%. I think it's 27%. So you better pay it. But if they owe you money, you're going to wait to get it. Okay? Rome, I think, invented that thing. So, because here's what he did. He was forced to pay 1,000 talents of gold annually toward his debt. Just think of how much money that was in today's currency. It's millions upon millions of dollars, okay? I think a talent, if I still remember, 75 pounds. 1,000 times 75 pounds, that's 75,000 pounds of gold. You do the math. Okay? Okay? Seleucus sends tax collectors throughout the kingdom. One man. Oh, so what's happening? He's got to pay this exorbitant fee. He's going to tax. Who's going to pay for it? Me? No, you are. So now he's going to send people throughout the towns taxing the people. And a guy named Robin Hood. No, just kidding. So he sends people throughout the kingdom to overly tax the people. One man named Helidorus plunders the temple in Jerusalem. Because remember, they're going through the toll booth, so they figured they'd take the results of the toll booth, which is Israel had a lot of gold in the temple. Everything was gold overlaid. So that's why I said they should have set up the toll booth. They could have repaid with their own money. So Seleucus' reign was short, but not sweet, and dies mysteriously because he says you just gone, found no more kind of thing. He's probably poisoned. Probably. I mean, that was the thing back then. But so that's kind of where we're at. We're going to pick up with verse 21 next week. The reason is because this is kind of like, okay, all I can remember is north and south. That's all I got. I realize it's heavy, but I want you to go through this and see the precision, though. Reread it. Mark north and south. Know what's going on. Because remember, the center of biblical understanding is always Jerusalem and the nation of Israel. So when it says north and south, there's a lot of things that's happening, and listen, we're not done with the north and south. When the future kingdoms come, and what happens is during the final battles that happen during the tribulation, epicenter's still the same place. Where's the epicenter today? Most people say, well, it's not Israel. That's still Israel because God hasn't changed. Right now, that's not part of the flow of biblical history. Israel's like on a spiritual timeout, but it's coming. And it's coming soon. And we got to say, what is trending? Remember what I said? These things are trending to set Messiah to come the first time. What's happening trending to set Messiah to come the second time? One of the things we see is economic crisis, right? See the rise of disease from sin and things that are going on. We see the rise of promiscuity and people calling things that 20, 30 years ago we said, that's just biblically wrong. Now they're calling it normal. So these things are trending. Say, Lord, what are we going to say? Lord, come quickly. And let's pray. Father, we thank you for this time again as we've gone through this wonderful book of Daniel. And Father, as we examine it, we want to be people of your word, knowing that you're a God who has told us what's going to happen, told us and warned us and prepared us. And we know that it's going to come with absolute precision. Father, I thank you for this word. I thank you for those that heard it this evening. Again, I ask that your blessing upon people that are traveling and people that are dealing with sickness and their families. Father, just put your hand upon them. In Jesus' name, amen.